The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
Okay, let's go.
You know, I'm not even some big jazz fan, but I think that ragtime intro is pretty nice. Anyway, I am back, and it's Ray Dewstar here, and this is episode number 2 of the 712, where we try and tackle current events as well as start the conversation on a later, deeper dive in under 10 minutes. I also wanted to start off by just saying thank you to everybody that gave a listen to the maiden episode of the 712 and also the maiden/inaugural episode of the Deep Shallow Dive, which is also up and live. If you haven't got a chance to listen to the two of them, they are both available wherever you listen to your podcast. And really quick, I wanted to clarify something because a good friend of mine, Ron, sent me a hilarious text where he's like, hey, I just listened to the 712 episode. That was cool. And it was great that it was under 10 minutes. And then Spotify told me your next episode is like 3 days long. And I started laughing and I was like, it's actually only 54 minutes. But I did want to provide some clarity. So I've divided this thing up into two sections. The base deep shallow dive, which will always be labeled DSD. After polling my friends on Facebook, and also there's a poll on Spotify if you listen through Spotify, I've decided to keep those under 30 minutes. It was either an hour or 30 minutes, and it seems like 30 minutes is the most manageable amount of time. Plus, you know what? I think starting out listening to me for 30 minutes is plenty. I can't even get my close family to listen to me for 30 minutes, so I'm good with this. From here, we're going to have segment like we have today, which is called the 712, and these I'm going to get done under 10 minutes. And these are going to really, start the conversation on certain topics, or they will talk about something current. For example, the first episode was about that Republican debate that took place. And so I did want to start off with a little bit of housekeeping from that first episode and clarify a couple things, and then also talk about something that a good friend of mine, Paul, kind of helped me understand. So my goal with this podcast is for it to be a living, breathing entity and something that's going to change and it's going to pivot. I was going to say it's going to mutate, but that sounds bad. But it's going to change and it's going to pivot. And then honestly, there's going to be things that, gosh, I might even get wrong, especially after, somebody points out, hey, have you looked at it this way? Or I agree with you on this, but I don't. And that's exactly what happened in the first episode where we talked about the Republican debate. My good friend Paul and I had a discussion about it. He gave me some great feedback, and he said, hey, I loved your podcast, but I totally disagreed with you on your take on the debate. I thought it was a great debate. So I asked him, I said, what part did you think was great? And he brought something up that I really didn't pay that much attention to, and it was in regards to Nikki Haley. I think I shared on the previous one, not a big fan of hers, but she did have a very, very logical and honestly one of the best takes on abortion that I think I've heard to date from anybody. I'm not going to rehash it completely, but I would encourage you to Google it or look on YouTube to give a listen for yourself. But in a nutshell, she talked about how we need to humanize the conversation and not demonize the conversation. And honestly, you can apply that to so many topics. Let's humanize things and not demonize them. I also wanted to clarify another thing that my good friend Catherine pointed out. And my point of that first podcast about the presidential debate was not that Trump should attend the debate, which I don't think he should. And I don't think Biden should have to debate either. But my point was that the interview with Tucker Carlson, which also I wasn't saying he shouldn't do an interview with Tucker Carlson. What I was saying was the two events should not have aired at the same time. I thought that was like biting off your nose to spite your face, and I thought that showed dysfunction within the Republican Party. The other thing, and the hot take portion of that, was that if they all drop out and say, hey, our only candidate is Trump, will the Democrats continue to move forward with all these indictments that keep popping up, knowing that if they do, what are they going to do? They're going to tell the American people, hey, sorry, there's no election. We've completely, for the first time in history, are not going to have an election because we've decided to indict the front-running candidate of the opposing party for XYZ. That was the point. Okay, let's get into today's 712. I want to talk about BRICS, and if you don't know what BRICS is, it's an acronym for a coalition of countries that have banded together. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So you take the first initial of their name, and they've created this entity called BRICS. Fundamentally, at a super high level, this is an entity that is intended to really go up against the G7. And this is funny, God, I'm telling you, the United States has never been super political. I think most people that I would poll would have no idea what the G7 is or who's in it. But the G7 is a group of countries: Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And then the European Union is like the, the stepbrother to this. But the G7 is an organized group of countries that basically bands together, and BRICS is now the competitor. So BRICS, again, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, these countries said, hey, you know what? That's cool. We'll form our own alliance and we'll form our own team, and that's what BRICS is. So at a super high level, it's really G7 versus BRICS. So for this 712, I'm going to keep it at a high level. I want to really introduce the concept of BRICS and get that on your radar, because we're going to deep shallow dive into that for sure. And there's probably going to be more 712s on it because it's going to keep coming up. For example, so last week they inducted 6 new countries into the BRICS organization: Argentina, Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. I'm going to focus on the last 3 because these are major oil-producing countries. And like I said, at the end of the day, this organization, one of their probably many goals is to stop the petrodollar from existing. And what the petrodollar is basically every country that buys oil from Saudi Arabia and Iran currently, and the UAE, they have to pay in the US dollar. And these guys want to allow them to settle these transactions in their local currency, or create another currency that they back it with instead of the US dollar. At the end of the day, what this will do is weaken the United States, and it'll weaken G7 and basically create a new playing field and create new global superpowers. The fact that Iran and Saudi Arabia are now part of the same organization, that's insane. Like, these two countries have kind of hated each other for a long time, probably my entire lifetime. And that's all rooted under their differences when it comes to the factions of the Muslim religion. And so now they're like part of the same team practically. And this all got brokered by really China and Russia. That's crazy. That really is something. It's like China and Russia brokered like Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik becoming friends, or like Rocky Balboa and Ivan Drago, or when Rocky and Apollo Creed became buddies. You know what I mean? It's like arch enemies are now friends. Seriously, arch enemies are now friends. And so you think about that, it's like, okay, do they now have a greater enemy? And if so, that's the United States. That's G7. That's the Western world, as you would say. This is going to be something that is going to continue to gain momentum and gain steam and come up. My goal today, more than anything, was just to introduce BRICS and introduce this organization to you so they're on your radar. So now when you start seeing more things about BRICS, you understand this coalition. I appreciate you listening. And another pivot from last week, I'm not going to say Ray D out. That's not mine. That's a rip off of Ryan Seacrest, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to say this. This is Ray Star. Thanks for listening, and remember to always call a spade a spade. That's my new outro, at least for now. Maybe that'll change as well.
This episode was brought to you by Boost Liquid Vitamins. Wake up, take your Boost, start your day. Drink your vitamins, build your immune system with Boost. Available on Boost.com.